Julie here with Sirius Dallas Moon. This is Mars hour, Mars day. The moon is applying to Deneb Algadi, which is a great time to call on Deneb Algadi for its lovely wealth redistribution, but also release of congestion and mold. And that's a great opportunity to talk about toxic mold. Isn't that exciting? So, here is why I find talking about and removing toxic mold like structures in spirit and in matter or in energy and in matter being such a productive topic. Why getting excited about removing mold and rejuvenating with that which creates and preserves ebb and flow that is not creating toxic mold and is allowing life, health, well being, love, joy, competence. That's exciting. So I hope I got you excited about removing toxic mold now that the moon, yes, is increasing, but we're talking about we're talking about mold. We're talking about toxic congestion of what seems to be very powerful. Okay, Pluto rules power, Pluto rules fungi, Pluto rules compost, Pluto rules rejuvenation. And whenever I have any stagnant situation in my life, or I just sit there and not really knowing what to do with the available time or energy, the number one thing is there something moldy to remove? Is there a compost to move so that it becomes fertile soil? It can be in literally cleanliness. It can be in structures and systems. It can be in stagnations regarding uh, patterns of thought, whether my own or others. And tending to that releases a lot of stagnation and allows energy flow. So, if I recall, just yesterday, as I tended to the misaligned structures of the bones of my feet, definitely released some stuff, definitely strengthened some muscles, definitely released a lot of emotional congestion, and it released energy for me to be able to exercise. I had all these things you heard me talking about more competently, um, less competently in the passing months were part of that mold release. Because there was a lot that was rising to the surface that I had to deal with around some simple procedure, such as improving the blood flow in a way that would not create fungi or mold within my body. Now, creating mold within another is creating mold within the self. Um, and that's something, that's a mindset. Because often, one of the reasons that I say a free man need not oppress another, or a free woman need not oppress another, it's not a moral view. It's an energy flow structure tip that can contribute to economicity in energy investment and expenditure versus yield. If I tend to removing mold, I get increased energy. I may need to rest, I may need to purge, but I regain alignment. Basically, I align myself with competence, thriving, joy, and so on and so forth. If I'm invested in trying to make another misaligned, I already show lack of competence. It's also how it's perceived if somebody, and this is how I come to say that, because if those tactics are attempted on me, I simply perceive it as incompetence. And then I do the shadow work of what moldy things can I remove within me to align myself with better, more reliable energy flow. So, going back to yesterday and that exercise while listening to the Kneading Cold Lady, and it's not name dropping, is basically how listening to a podcast that talks about putting awareness and putting in the light the toxic mold around cult like military. Sounds very relevant to me, by the way. Okay, ninth house Scorpio, Pluto, Saturn, 22 Mars, all retrograde. Pluto is politics, power, Saturn is structure, 22 Mars is intelligence and or psychological operations, occult operations, military operations of an international or worldly scale. So a podcast, which is a form of communication, and this stellium is ruling over my Mercury, was basically a form of this shedding light, which is what we love to do with Pluto, putting something in the light, shedding light on what? On a mechanism, Saturn, of a cult, Pluto, in a military, Mars 22, of United States, international, ninth house. That released the congestion around my ninth house as I was doing that fitness work. So just pay attention how many things began to sync, particularly now with that Mars still in a bisextile with Saturn and Uranus. And that sends a dynamo. So the next thing I would do would be to imitate my cat. It's a great physical exercise. Um, Once she got too pissed off for me, I decided to take a walk. And this is where I ran into a property that was written for rent and for sale. Te huur, te kauf, in both languages. And immediately I sent a message, didn't receive a reply until now, and I understand why, because I was actually interested in the property. Now, not an offense about the property, but when I walked to the other side, I saw a mattress that was dry and a sheet ton of wet clothes with something that looks like feathers, with something that looks like toxic mold. What I could remove with my bare hands, I did. And the reason I did that was not because I was going to buy the property now, but because there is something moldy that I could remove. And if I'm working on removing moldy, and it can be caries in the teeth, it can be toenail fungi, it can be athlete's foot, any such thing, yeast overgrowth, any such thing, this is in alignment with tending to removing toxic mold. And funnily enough, in the environment, I ran into that around what? Housing. So there I was entering already a flow, a synchronicity that released more energy, created more clarity, even if it was just a little bit. It's a shit ton of things there. I'm not going to solve all the problems there, but I did something. I made a small step without asking who is living there, without asking whether that deal will be mine or not. Okay, I was not putting anything in there, and I was not expecting in return anything for what I did, which means that I was not trespassing. Okay, trespassing is not crossing over, which can be accidental. Trespassing would mean that I changed something significant around the place that I require dividends for without asking for permission. Let's say if I would completely renovate the place and would ask permission and would not ask permission, okay, they could tell me, but if I remove something that's potentially toxic, I'm actually caring for the environment and I'm removing something that could increase toxic mold there. Precaution for people who take that advice: third party insurance would not necessarily qualify for me. Okay? And that's important because if people actually get to places where there is a lot of toxic mold and there is actually a ceiling, which on the back of the house wasn't, um, they could get into issues. So, but I was showing of something that began to be properly aligned. Now, on the scale, to trespass in order to clear that toxic mold so it wouldn't cancer the area and the neighbors is more important. In fact, the owner would probably be um, receiving shit ton of fines for exposing that type of property, which is also something for me to think about as prospective estate owner, whether it's my estate or any other type of estate. And I think about this point only when I'm explaining that to you, which is another form of removing toxic mold. When we teach something or when we explain something, it's also a form of learning and integrating and further embodying the positive things that we've been doing and a positive alignment. The next step would be that I ran into kind of like a city council and I asked them if there is a housing restoration project for just this type of properties, and I get the answer no, which basically means I have discovered a blue ocean. No one is doing that in the entire metropolitan. Probably there are good reasons why. Okay, probably there are people that thought about it before me. But right now, I've ventured into a blue ocean. If I start a restoration company now, that would be shit fuck difficult because I would need expert on black mold. And I would need to know the insurance that I need for these people. Okay, I don't want people to get lung cancer doing that. I would need to tackle those things first. And all that's really needed to be is showing the municipality, here is how you can gain a shit ton of money. We can make all the people with toxic mold exposed in their structures, fix that, and I have a company that does that, and we can locate and we can create a group purchase for them. They don't have to hire my company. But if they choose to, I already have created the clientele that they themselves can align and unionize and negotiate a pricing with me. And I have already come up with the pricing that will be profitable for me to do that, or with the range of pricing that will be profitable for me to do that. So it's fair trade, fair corporation, and an opportunity, because if they don't choose to do that within a limited time, there can be enforcing from the municipality for them to pay fines, which would also release a lot of congested properties to be reinvested in the private and public sector. Now, anything that would resist my offer exposes what? Trafficking, extortion calls. Because justification would need to be found why, when there are homeless people, when there is youth at risk, when there are people wanting to buy properties, do we have properties that want to sell but can't sell and can't um, allocate their apartments into affordable housing business model? Now, if I can renovate a house, I can create affordable housing business models, because all I have to do is to budget for luxury standard, which is full priced and fully subsidized. Housing first, independent of ability to work for unlimited time. One luxury house per one house. And if I budget that so that with those things, I would still have each and every employee in each and every rank being able to buy a house, or to get a property, or to get a dividends in a company in the form of even the house that they restore. Okay? I've already created a solution to a long-withstanding problem that is also contributing to national and international security, because I have established that the cure for the most difficult mental ailment, which is schizophrenia, is housing first, independent of ability to work for unlimited time, believe in the patient, and then the only reason that people would not curate with that would be if the targeting of them hasn't stopped, which would expose what? Trafficking and extortion cult. Now, that establishes something, that trafficking and extortion cults create a toxic mold congestion. First of all, I have exemplified that in the housing. And again, if there's a problem with my line of arguments, please write in the comments so I can refine either my explanation, my argument, or my opinion. And here is the thing. When we expose the toxic mold in the structure, okay, we shed light on the problem. That thing which works on, in Hebrew we say shitat matzliach. And shitat matzliach is basically, if we manage to do that, then it works. Now, that can be positive opportunism, but it can also be toxic mold opportunism. The difference being, are we aligned with sovereignty, or are we still trying to enslave people and get somebody else to do that, not because it's their vision and their sovereignty and their competence, but because they're stupid enough to do that and not something more? Okay? And even when I say that, I have to clarify it again, which means to do that and not something that contributes to their sovereignty more, which is, of course, not to be dependent on enslaving other people, which requires a shit ton of energy, however efficient the gaslighting is. Okay? Now, when that begins to compound, this is where the fungal structures begin to dissolve everywhere. So, takeaways from this video. Tending to moldy structures is done on several layers. Within the body, if we have blockages, psychic attacks, whatnot, what do we mean? We ran into what? Extortion cult. So first of all, we know how to align the fact that, let's say, our toenail fungi, our athlete's foot, our caries in the teeth, has to do with something that was created by an extortion cult and its residues. So when we are removing mold, now we have also motivation and mission, importance. When we're removing mold, we're removing extortion and trafficking cults, which is a problem we thought we cannot tend to, or we didn't even know that exists. So the problem is surfaced, and we begin to take the steps to remove toxic mold. Now, the various levels of interference, it can be in a structure, in a house, in a property, in our own body. If people are working in something like a pedicure, it can be with clientele, and they will notice that they tend to attract clientele with either toenail fungi or something like that. For example, about a year before my second course of aromatherapy teacher bought her first house, I was her student with a problem to do with the toenail fungi, and she told me was prescribed for your um, nervous system or mental health or whatnot is interfering with the absorption of the oils. To which I said, if I want to curate something holistically, I have to address the thing that was interfering also with the absorption of minerals, which would contribute to healthy and balanced nervous system. It was also interfering with my budget to acquire, let's say, salmon or sprouts or something that is actually supportive of my nervous system. That opened the journey of rethinking, first of all, my entire life, and for her, it released congestion among other clients that she tended to around the topic of housing and apartment, which eventually began to also be relevant to me. And then, of course, the problems began to arise. They let her buy a house, be committed to a mortgage, and then she was tortured and she was forced to work against me, which I could be very offended, and of course it brought a lot of emotions, but I could also see it as, well, this is what happened to this lady when she went through that. It means that it happens to people that try to actually do the shadow work, take responsibility over their life at the time where they begin to get more fit. They bought a house. They begin to actually remove and purge things. And this is where they try to gatekeep that growth, which is exactly what would happen to me when I would work on my business, trying to refine my own skill. By the way, essential oils, Pluto, the essence of a plant, the most dense, almost atomic dense essence of a plant, which is incredibly potent. And this is why it's so good for fungal stuff, not because you just put it and it solves the problem, but because it generates a dynamo where if you're attuned, you will see what other moldy things have been in my life that I can create movement around. That movement creates a friction and a heat that dries out the excess humidity around the fungal structure, but allows for the water ebb and flow, which is also the blood ebb and flow, to become more aligned. And then it shows what other problems are there. For example, it took me 2-3 years to see that it was also the structure of my toes, other than the big toe, that needs to be aligned. And it's not just to do a surgery, because surgery can backfire, get inflamed, and so on. It's to work on the everythingness with the exercise, with what comes in mind, what comes in thought. Okay? And basically it's taking my sovereignty back from dissociation and lack of awareness. Okay, so we get it on a body level, on an environment level, on a thought level, on an emotional level. When we do that, when we remove what's congested, we basically remove the things that the unhealthy forms of power, which is basically a form of powerlessness, without judgment. Okay, it's corresponding with our helplessness shadow. Okay, so we basically remove anything that this type of toxic form of power could latch onto or hold onto, and we invite healthier and healthier forms of understanding power, power structure, using power in competence and in alignment with what is actually also in benefit of ourselves and humanity. So this is something that and again, after we've done that, it's a very good thing to contemplate on that, to begin to think, hey, what happened there? Um, you could be quite exhausted. This is why it's not just about, let's say it's a nail or even a teeth. Not just about, oh, clear your teeth every day. It's very important to be consistent. Okay, usually there was a reason you became inconsistent. What is that reason? And this is where Uranus here in the B6 comes into play, because it's going to show you the various phases of, let's say, toxic mold, the various phases of toxic mold that basically appear for you to tend to. Okay, it's not about it's getting worse before it's getting better. It's simply, hey, we didn't see that before, and once we call out something, we created a movement. And when we create that movement, it has some sort of a dialectic response, because what's toxic dissolves and makes way for healthier forms of power and competence to emerge. Okay? With anything fungal, there are the fungi that contribute to our health, and it's also good to consume those, and there are the fungi that interfere with our health. And um, and the more we align with this dynamo process, the more basically it becomes a flow, or it becomes a second nature. And when that becomes a second nature, we basically have created alternative to the toxic power structures. So we're less concerned about the toxic power structures and more about being in that alignment that naturally grows and expands.